Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to introduce Autumn Cumlin. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist and the nutrition coordinator at Stoughton Health. After earning a degree at UW-Madison, she completed her dietetic internship at UW Hospital and Clinics. As a nutritionist for many years, Autumn has worked in healthcare as the clinical dietitian, as a consultant for businesses, in food service management, and in academia as an adjunct professor. She is excited to share with you today appetite correction and how it can change your life as it pertains to health and aging. With such a big group, we are hoping that you could either just keep your questions in mind or put them in the chat, and we will circle back at the end. And a side note, I listened to Autumn give this presentation to our diabetes group, and it really is some great information. So thanks a lot, Autumn.
You're welcome. Thank you for that great introduction. Hello, everyone. Glad you could tune in to hear us today. We're going to talk about appetite correction to help you get control, lose weight, and gain health. And so I want to give credit where credit is due. A lot of the information from this book is based on the book on the power of appetite correction by Bert Herring. So I do recommend you checking out that book if you'd like so after this presentation. So without further ado, we'll get going. So the starting line. We know that people with excess body fat have not one, but two problems to fix. So we know that being overweight or having a surplus of fat can cause other health problems, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease issues, in addition to many other health problems. But there's a cause, overeating, that caused the condition. And so the fix is the power of appetite correction, which is what we're going to talk about today. Right. Many will try various techniques or various tools to help them to manage excess weight. They might go on special diets, they might try diet pills, might try surgery, might dress appropriately so that they're wearing black or that stripes are going in a certain direction, or running, exercising, and doing a lot of activities to help, or some would do surgery. For some, these types of techniques can be successful, and they can help to remove excess fat or surplus of fat. But again, it's going to come at a cost. So we know a lot of advertisements out there, whether it be the magazines on in the aisle at the grocery store, or ads you see pop up on Facebook or Instagram or wherever it may be online, in addition to television ads that you might see, talking about ways in which we can lose this weight. So whether it be a weight loss program that might be advertised or the latest, greatest diet. And so we want to get back to these solutions do work for some, but they don't work for all. And they're not always a foolproof way of correcting the problem. And so we do need to get to the root of the problem and try to cure it from there. And so I want to talk about that, monetizing the misfortune. And so, is a person's willpower faulty? Well, the answer to that is no. So there's a lot more to an overeating problem than just willpower. So trying to prevent yourself from overeating or to snacking on the things you don't want to snack on. But there's two issues more tangled together in this situation. And so it's the questioning, why does your preference to eat less fail to keep you from eating? And what is it that you're fighting when you lose this willpower battle? So we're going to try to pull this tangle apart and look at both aspects. But first, we have to consider info clutter. So as I mentioned a little bit already, we are bombarded with lots of stories in various media channels about people that have had a miraculous weight loss or had wonderful results to any type of a program or exercise regime that they might be following. Is it like the lottery? Some people might win, others might not. But in some cases, it just seems it's up to random chance that, some people do benefit from it and other people do not. But we do know that, excuse me, that it is a tug of war and the power is on the opposite rope from you. So a lot of what you hear comes from people pulling against you. So stuff that sounds good, there may be a little bit of validity to it, but it doesn't really solve the problem. So who wins the tug of war if you eat too much? Well, as you can see from this long list here, these are all the people, if you overeat, that are going to benefit from you doing so, whether it be those obvious food sellers or manufacturers or producers, the drug and supplement makers and sellers, could be the shapewear that you might choose to wear to help tuck everything in, fitness centers, medical centers, weight loss counseling, packaged meal services, supermarket tabloids, how you're going to lose those next 10 pounds, any fraudulent things you might see out there, some maybe fake supplements or people that claim they have the magic pill, but doesn't tend to be the magic pill. So all of these things, even when we get to the point where now you're overweight and you can't be mobile. And so now you've got to rely on some electric scooters or getting wider toilet seats or paying for more on the airline in order to get a bigger seat. Diet books, there's a plethora of other people that are going to benefit from you eating too much. And so we want to talk about now who benefits from you eating less. And so as you can see here, obviously you're going to feel better. You're going to spend less on food, spend more quality time doing things because you're going to have more time available to you. And we'll talk more about what that means. But then also your family, you're going to be happier. You're probably going to live longer. You're going to cost your insurance company less. Your benefits at your employer are going to be better. You'll be more productive. You'll have fewer sick days. Your insurance premium, as I mentioned, will go down. And hopefully me too. I'm going to benefit because I do enjoy people seeing them be successful in meeting their weight loss goals. So all of these people are on the same team that are going to benefit from you gaining that ability to be able to be lighter, to lose weight. So we know an appetite correcting lifestyle gives you the license to break the following rules. So a lot of us have grown up with knowing that we have to clean our plate, to make sure we include breakfast because it's the most important meal of the day, not to eat late at night, enjoy every few hours to keep your metabolism revved up, to only eat low-fat foods. We know the saying, don't swim immediately after eating, don't play with your food. If you don't eat your meat, you can't have your pudding. So these are some of the rules that we want to break. And we want to get away from this mentality or this thinking, and knowing that a lot of these things are okay, and you can not have to clean your plate, and you can skip breakfast, and that's okay. So we'll go further detail into these, but keeping in mind that we don't have to play by all of these rules. So in order to address the root cause of excess fat or surplus fat, we have to look a little deeper into what's going on. So there's an autopilot in your brain's core. So we're going to talk about appetite versus hunger. So we've got the sympathetic nervous system. That's the nerve network that drives that flight or fight response and how you were going to respond to those types of situations. Then we've got the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the feed or breed system. So that is important for regulating digestion, controlling reproductive activities. And together, these two systems work together to make up the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system controls a lot of things that you don't even think about. It takes control away from the conscious mind when in survival mode is at stake. And so that can be many different things, but we'll go into more of the appetite at this point. So the drive to eat. So that's that feeling or that desire to eat. So it is generated by the appetite center of the brain. And you have about as much control over your appetite as you do the temperature or your heart rate. It is primitive in controlling a drive. So meaning that you can't really control a lot of it. So just like your ability to breathe, you just automatically do those things. But I do want you to keep in mind that appetite is different than somatic hunger or limbic hunger. And we'll talk about these as well. So somatic hunger is more of that sensation that you feel in your belly. So kind of maybe that grumbling feeling if you feel like you're hungry. And the limbic hunger, is the drive to continue eating until full once you start eating. So the drive to eat overwhelms conscious choice to the contrary, and the human drive to overeat persists despite the presence of excess fat on board. So when this happens, the apostat wins. So when the apostat in the core of your brain determines that you need to eat, you will eat unless that drive is overridden by another brain core system like the flight or fight, as I mentioned. So your apostat can set eating behavior in motion against your will, and that is called appetite-driven eating, or we'll refer to it as ADE. So we usually see appetite-driven eating behaviors emerge from the brain core that when we see it will typically be seen when it explains willpower loses the battle to eat less almost all the time. So it's keeping in mind your apostat isn't broken, it's just slightly out of tune. And so we're going to talk about how you can try to get that back in tune so you can benefit from this appetite correction. So I want you to think about, we eat too often. In the typical standard Americanized diet, we typically will eat 3 meals a day. So where this started was as an attempt by common folks to emulate rich people. So rich people had no better way to indulge themselves than demonstrate their wealth than eating frequently. So it wasn't something that we've been doing it a long time, but it wasn't something that came backed by any science. So, and then in the early 20th century, advertisers, especially breakfast cereal companies, they started pushing the consumption of eating breakfast as being the most important meal of the day. And the reason for doing so was for them to make money. So we know the trend towards even greater consumption now continues because we've got the 4th meal encouraged, or schools encouraging kids to bring snacks to school and offering snacks in between meals, and the snack after dinner. And so a lot of this has caused the problem that we have is that we eat too often. And so that brings into more of a thought on fasting. And so this presentation kind of does tie into that quite nicely, and it kind of where the background of that information comes from. So with fasting, it means going without food for some period of time, but it doesn't necessarily have any specific duration attached to it. And so I want you to keep in mind, this isn't some fad or something that is crazy. I mean, people have been fasting for hundreds of years. And a lot of religious groups fast for various reasons. And everybody fasts on a nightly basis when you finish your last meal of the day and then you go to bed and you don't eat again until your next meal, typically breakfast the next day. So it's not a foreign concept, but it is something we have to think about in another way. So most people will eat the traditional breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then they might have a couple snacks in there. And that can span about a 12-hour eating window. So that's very common, and that would not be considered fasting. If you think about 24 hours in a day, roughly you're sleeping probably, hopefully 7 to 8 hours, but then you've got those periods when there's no eating at maybe the end of the meal or before you eat breakfast in the morning. So again, this is not considered typical fasting in terms of what we're going to talk about for appetite correction, but it's going without food for at least 50% longer than the longest interval between meals on a customary 3-meal-a-day schedule. So if you think about 12 hours times 1.5, that'd be 18 hours. So that's meaning fasting in an 18-hour time period. So that would be, not eating after your dinner meal and then fasting between, let's say you're done at 6 o'clock at night, and then fasting all the way until the next day till 18 hours has passed, taking advantage of your sleep. So with that brings intermittent fasting. And so that's any repeating schedule of fasting, could be alternating with periods of eating where the fasting periods fits that description aforementioned, where it could be that 18-hour span. So intermittent means sporadic sometimes or unreliable, but in this case, we're talking about something that would happen more on a daily basis, but it stops and starts with a defined schedule. So many people do intermittent fasting where they would not eat in a schedule such as 18 hours, but they would eat in a 6-hour frame, or they might not eat for 19 hours, but they would eat in a 5-hour window, or Some are a little bit more extreme and might do a 20-hour fast and only eat their meal or meals in a 4-hour window. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that plays into it. But this is a concept of giving your body a break. As I mentioned, we eat too much and we eat too often, and we need to get our insulin levels brought down so that we can start tapping into our fat stores. And the only way of doing that is to give our body the break. So we'll pause on that and go back to what types of hunger we have. So hunger is one of the major obstacles that one faces to fat loss. So it's important to understand and recognize that hunger can mean different things because there are 5 different types of hunger. So there is the somatic hunger, as I kind of mentioned, where is that grumbling or that feeling in your gut. Limbic hunger, clock hunger, and we're going to go through each of these. Appetite-driven eating, and then mouth hunger. So again, as I mentioned, somatic hunger, that's that growling or that grumbling or that hunger you feel in your belly. It might be like a twisting sensation. It could be a sort of a cramping. Often you'll hear your stomach gurgling. So that's somatic hunger. Then we move on to what limbic hunger is, and that is that instinctive hunger that drives you to eat more than you intended to eat. So you take your first bite and then you just can't stop yourself. You eat more than what you wanted. And that's kind of where that potato chip slogan, no one can eat just one, came from. So you kind of, once you start, it's hard to stop. And so that's also kind of the reason the serving size in a certain thin minty cookie should be a sleeve and not the 4 cookie serving claimed on the package. It's because it's really hard to control yourself and to hold back when you start taking that first bite, and it's kind of unresistible. And then we talk about clock hunger. And clock hunger is your body's biological clock ticking, saying, hey, yesterday at this time you ate breakfast. I'm expecting the same today. And so this will be felt as somatic hunger, kind of a grumbling in your stomach, but about 23 to 24 hours after the last time you ate the day before. So if you typically eat breakfast, you can expect to see and feel those hunger pains that next morning around that same time. So then, and it's kind of like punching a clock. So it's called the clock hunger. But on the other hand, if you usually eat a morning breakfast, then you don't eat it for several days, then that morning clock hunger will dissipate. It'll fade. And then as days go on, you won't be hungry at that time anymore. Then we've got appetite-driving eating or appetite-driven eating. So it's an odd kind of hunger. You don't feel it, as I mentioned, with the grumbling of your stomach, but you can see it and experience it. So that's when you kind of vision yourself eating when you'd rather not be eating. You might not even feel hungry, but then all of a sudden you're stuffing food in your mouth and you're eating, but you're really not quite sure why you're eating. Your mind might be saying, stop, but your body's complying. You continue to eat. So that again is that appetite-driven eating. And then we've got mouth hunger, and that's related to the appetite-driven eating, but it's the urge to chew on or eat something when you're not really hungry. So usually you see this most often when you're eating carbohydrate-rich foods. So you might get a particular craving or a particular hunger for a certain food. You don't want just anything, but in particular, you're looking for a texture, a taste, a mouthfeel, something crunchy, something sweet, something chewy, something salty. So you're really, you're being driven by that desire of what you're looking for. So there's different kinds and sources of hunger, and recognizing them can help you to tune into what's prompting you to eat. And that's a very good part to kind of be aware of when you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to get a hold of your eating habits, is paying attention to what kind of hunger you are experiencing so that you know that is this true hunger or is this just driven by something else. So I want to break down those myths a little bit that we talked about. So breakfast being the most important meal of the day. So we know that we've heard this our whole lives. It's accepted without question, but it is just pure marketing genius. Again, it was started as or our cereal companies of why we shouldn't skip breakfast. We really need to eat those Frosted Flakes, for example. So it has been used to sell billions of dollars of breakfast foods. And again, it encourages people to eat when they're really not hungry. We know that we live in a very powerful culture where we are very driven, and the actions that we have are driven by advertising, not necessarily science. So we do know that, we're told that Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, or that Energizer batteries keep going and going, and we just accept it as so. There is no science to back that up. And so that's kind of where that breakfast being the most important meal of the day comes from. But it is an expression that's been so deeply ingrained that, again, it's assumed as common knowledge. But I just want you to think about a twist on that. So breakfast, and then we'll talk about it too, is break fast. It doesn't have to be first thing when you wake up in the morning. It doesn't have to be the very meal that you eat in the morning hours. It's breaking your fast. So it's when you choose to break that fast, when you haven't been eating, and now you're going to open up your window and eat. So we'll talk about that in more detail. But also other myths, that fasting burns muscle. So on the contrary, fasting does not burn muscle unless you have been fasting for at least 2 days and you do not have any stores available of glycogen and in your liver, and your blood can't spare any protein, which is a very rare circumstance. So your body does not prefer to burn muscle, and it's not going to burn that muscle. It's going to burn your excess calories. So first of all, if you're eating food, your body's going to take the easy route, and it's going to use the calories from the food you eat. It's not going to tap into your stores. And so what we're trying to get to with appetite correction and with intermittent fasting is to start tapping into those stores that you have on board. So we know that fasting and breaking down certain muscle would not likely happen. But again, we know that our bodies are smarter than that, and our species would not be here today if that was the case. So we can very much live off the fat on our body and break that down as fuel and use that for energy. So although brief periods of fasting won't burn muscle, as I mentioned, again, when you are eating your fill every day and you are using it or losing it, you're using what you're taking in, you definitely know that you can store excess fat or store excess nutrition or calories if you're not going to utilize it. So if you're inactive, your muscles will wither from lack of use, whether you're eating 1,000 calories or 10,000 calories. So again, if you don't use it, you lose it. So we know that exercise may not be a perfectly effective way to lose weight, although it is very important, and we want to encourage physical activity in daily life, but it's not going to be the biggest means in which you're going to lose weight. It can work effectively together, but it's not going to be as effective as appetite correction for fat loss in particular, but very important for maintaining good health. So I want to talk about a goal body. So a lot of people talk about a goal weight and where they want to be, but I want you to think about a goal body. So having that instead of a goal weight, we know that weight isn't a good goal for a couple of reasons. Most people probably wouldn't really care how much they weighed if they know they felt good and they looked good and their health was good. But we happen to know that, we can step on a scale and know what we weigh. And so that's kind of a number we tend to focus on. But if excess weight was not associated with all of health issues and burden and that type of thing, we probably wouldn't pay that too much attention to it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what your goal body and what that means. So again, the second reason weight is not a great goal is a lot of things influence your weight besides the amount of fat in the body. So we know we're made of 70% water. And so there's that water balance that happens there. Water enters your body very easily when you eat and drink, and it makes up many of the foods that you eat as well. We lose it when we breathe, as well as when you go to the restroom and you urinate or have a bowel movement, if you have diarrhea, if you're sweating. So that's how we lose that water. And we also know that how much salt we have in our diet can affect how much water we retain or how many carbohydrates we consume. And fluctuations can be anywhere from about 1 pound a day or more, where our body can shift. If we were hooked up to a scale, we would see that fluctuation go up and down all day. Eventually, it does balance out and regulate, except in some conditions where we're talking about like congestive heart failure, where they might hold on to a little bit more water than the typical average healthy individual. But in most cases, it's going to be that balance there, and we won't have to worry so much about it. But so setting your sights on all the really good stuff that comes with achieving your goal body is a good thing to keep in mind when you're trying to reach your goal. So what is it about being lean that you want? You know, hopefully most of you came here to this presentation today to kind of learn about appetite correction and how to maybe get a better grasp on your own. So that happy place is sometimes hard to describe, is kind of what you want. What is it about being lean that you want? But it could be for some people feeling like, hey, I can fit into my skinny clothes, or I can wear that tuxedo or that suit I haven't worn since my wedding. I might be able to go in a notch on my belt buckle. It might be that favorite dress that you haven't been able to wear in years, whatever it may be. But it could also be related to an activity that you want to do. You know, maybe you want to start running and you just feel like with this excess weight, you can't be a runner, or you want to, you know, rock climb, or whatever it may be. So keeping in mind all of those things, imagine yourself and what your ideal or your goal body would be, and what activities are you doing. So what is kind of your goal of where you want to be in terms of your goal body. So we have three kind of bodies to consider. You're not at goal body, so that might be where you are now. If you're not at goal, you might be where you have more fat on you than you would prefer to have, versus looking at a goal body where you would be happy with your body. It could be, again, reflected in a clothing size, maybe a waist circumference, just feeling lighter and more energetic on your feet. It could be, you know, a certain view that you see reflecting back at you at the mirror of what you'd like to see. And again, it could be fitting into some of those clothing, but also thinking about what an ideal body weight is. And so that's the very best that you could imagine your body to be. So it might be more unrealistic in some cases, versus a goal body is kind of where you would want to be to achieve those things that you want to be able to do. And then along the way, when you're trying to get to your goal body, we have stepping stones, and those are called non-scale victories, or NSVs. And we'll talk about those. So they could be anything from now being able to have lost weight and can shop at a regular department store instead of a big and tall, or you want to be able to shop in the Missy section instead of the women's or the plus size. Could be you're able to do more activity. You're maybe able to run longer. You may be able to walk longer. You're not feeling winded when you're going upstairs. It could be feeling the willpower to pass up a donut or the candy dish at work, or maybe just having more money in your wallet because you weren't buying snacks throughout the day, that you now can spend it on something more meaningful or more useful. Or maybe you're seeing more muscles than you haven't seen in years. Usually they've been hidden. So there can be a lot of non-scale victories that you should keep in mind along your journey that are just as important as those scale victories. So some reasons why judging fat loss only by weight doesn't work well. So we know that exercising while losing fat weight may not drop very much. There might not be much progress evident, because we know muscle mass increases as fat mass decreases, and it usually won't grow as fast or as much as fat mass can decrease. So you don't usually see it when you're exercising. You might be getting stronger, but you're not always seeing that as a reflection of how much weight you're losing. Also, keeping mindset being very important for sustaining any plan that you're going to follow, but keeping your goal body in mind, again, visualizing that of where you want to be, the activities you want to be able to do, you know, the benefits and freedoms that it may give you. And again, reminding you how you may feel when you're in your new body. And also, again, it doesn't have to be a specific number, but it can be more along the lines of what you're hoping to achieve and what you want to feel when you get there. But for a lot of people, losing that scale is very hard to do. So if you are one that would like to keep track of your weight through a scale, be sure to use the same scale for all your measurements. You know, always weigh at the same time each day, preferably in the morning if you use the restroom. So be consistent with that. Again, be realistic about how much weight or how much fat you can burn in a day. There are many apps and devices you can use to help you record your weight, but we like to focus more on a moving average. So weighing weighing yourself, maybe if you do it every day, and then taking a weekly average, or looking at from 1 week to the next, or the same couple weeks, you're looking at the same day, as to kind of track how you're doing. And this can be more beneficial. You can see more of the trend than looking at, well, oh, my weight's up today than it was yesterday, but then you maybe ate something salty, so you can't always know that that's true weight gain. That's more of a water fluctuation. So if you take the average over the course of a week, you have a better number of what you're looking at and then what your progress looks like from week to week. So I mentioned a little bit about exercise. And again, I'm not saying exercise is not important. Definitely you want to engage in that, especially as each year we get older, we lose more and more lean muscle mass. So doing more strength training things can be beneficial. But getting on the treadmill and hammering out, 45 minutes, hour and a half on a treadmill is not necessarily going to help you reach your goals. Number one, because it's probably not sustainable to do that. And number two, it isn't always going to have the biggest impact as like appetite correction might have. So leverage on the autopilot. So when you have achieved appetite correction, when you've gotten yourself to this part where you are able to listen to your body and you know the differences between the different types of appetite, you can start realizing that when you are eating, you start paying attention to those signals of being full or of having had enough. So if you have surplus, you eat a bit less than your body's fuel demands require it until the surplus of the fuel has been used up. And then once that's gone, your appetite automatically increases your appetite a notch, just enough to maintain a steady balance. So as you're working towards your weight loss and you're losing weight, that's going to readjust and know that, okay, now we've got to a new set point, and now we're going to re-regulate again so we can continue to lose weight if we need to, or we're going to maintain if we've gotten to a point in which we are good there. So we have this appetite tool shed. So sometimes one good tool is all you need to keep your body vehicle tuned up. So we provide you with some tools in your toolkit, and with some, you might need to tweak some things in order to make them work for you, and try to make it fit into your life. Because again, a lot of times when we talk about like intermittent fasting or appetite correction, and we're talking about trying to make it fit into your lifestyle, not necessarily your lifestyle fit into it. But you might need to make some tweaks and changes to how you do things. But having these tools on hand can help you to try to make sure that you keep a rein on if your eating habits and your awareness of what you're eating and in terms of what your body needs. So I'm going to go through some of these tools that we have for you. So the tool number one is your compass. So you are a study of one. You're experimenting on just one person, you. You're looking to see whether a change you've made is doing good stuff for you or not. So the easiest way is to take a snapshot of your health now, so then at a later point, you can compare. So a basic snapshot could include checking your waist measurement, doing a weigh-in, checking your blood pressure, maybe doing it 3 times on a store like Walmart or Walgreens or wherever on the machine, but then maybe on a home unit and kind of deciding what your average is from there, determining it. Maybe taking some before pictures, maybe having some labs done. So maybe looking at your HSCRP. So that's a level of inflammation in your body. And the lower it is, the better. And so maybe taking a pre of that and then asking your doctor to draw another one later on to see if you've improved that. Looking at your hemoglobin A1C. So this is a blood test that tells us if you have diabetes, or if you do have diabetes, how your blood sugars have been in the previous 3 months. Then also like a lipid profile. How is your cholesterol looking like? Your good versus your bad versus your total cholesterol versus your triglycerides, so the fat in the blood. So looking at all of those things, and then, in a few months comparing them again to see if the changes that you're doing are making a difference. And then we've got tool number 2, and this is your appetite correction eating schedule. So looking at, again, could be the 5 fast rule. So this would be maybe eating within a 5 consecutive hours, as I mentioned. So maybe that 19-5 regimen we talked about. But then, realizing you're going through an adaptation period as well. And you might take a couple weeks to see some changes as to the effect of what you're doing. And go ahead a little bit because I had this one I wanted to share. So how does an appetite correcting eating schedule correct the appestat? So as I mentioned, if you're a fasting interval of 19 hours and you repeat that daily, that should be adequate to create ketosis. And that's where your body is breaking down the fat that is stored in your body and utilizing those ketones as energy. And so it's very different than ketoacidosis, which is a dangerous condition when we're talking about diabetics or diabetes. So this is different. This is ketosis. So it's made by the liver when the fat gets burned for fuel. And the presence of it maybe sometimes has a fruity essence on the breath that can indicate someone is in that fat burning state. And when we generate those ketones, they circulate in the blood and they can be used for fuel for your brain, for your muscles, and for your other tissues. And it is a really good source of fuel, and it's helping us to tap into those fat stores. And that's really what is happening. So you can, again, as I mentioned, determine your schedule. If that 19-5 doesn't sound right to you, you can always start with that 18-6 as a good place. Usually will get you in that right fat burning stage. But also, they're usually the ones that are recommended when you're following an appetite correcting eating pattern. So if your eating schedule works to correct your appetite, so you eat an amount appropriate to your body's fat content without having to fight with sheer willpower, then you have reached appetite correction. So again, you can select a 5-hour window that best suits you. If you work and it's easier for you to want to eat in the later evening hours, like for dinner and after that, or late afternoon through dinner, then that might be a good pattern for you. If you're retired and I really enjoy the early part of the day eating, you could flip it to the morning hour and then fast after that bigger meal or that 5-hour window. And maybe you're fasting from noon on. So there's lots of opportunities and a lot of things you can customize it to meet your plan. So how do you get started with an appetite correcting eating plan? So it's when you're, again, using your fat for fuel instead of depending on what you're taking in at your meals. So it could be also being aware, if you think that you're going to be hungry, not to overeat for future hunger, for example. So you don't want to overeat till you're stuffed now if you know you're going to be fasting and not eating again until tomorrow. So it's kind of getting you to that point where you feel like I'm satisfied and I will be fine until this time tomorrow. And so there's different ways of doing this, and we'll talk about each of these. So it's the cold turkey method, the ratchet, or the progressive method of how you might get into appetite correcting eating schedule. So the cold turkey start would be choosing one day to not eat until your eating window opens. So I'll give you a real life example. So mine, when I originally started my journey on this over probably 5 years ago now, would be looking at, okay, if I typically ate in a 12-hour window, how do I break that down, maybe get it to 9 or 10 hours, and so that I could better control that, so that allowed me to fast longer. And then slowly worked my way up to, more of a fasting in a 20-hour window in most cases, maybe an 18, 19-hour on the weekends. And so choosing one day to not eat until that window opens for you, that could be that cold turkey start. Can be very effective for especially earlier windows, but could require maybe a number of close but not quite days before you finally get the hang of it or able to maintain that goal. Usually it gets easier as the days go on. So by day 5, usually you're pretty good at this by now. Crunch day is critical to getting your body to rev up its fat burning capacity. So you have to push your body for it to build up its ability to do more. So it's kind of like building up that fasting muscle, we like to call it. So then we have the ratchet start. And so this one is you would push your break fast time on day one at least 15 minutes later than the day before. So if you're going to break your fast at 10 a.m., you might say, okay, today I'm going to open it at 10:15. If you're not hungry, then go, well, actually, I'm going to push it another 15. I'm going to wait till 10:30 and see how I feel. And then the next day, you might again push it back another 15 minutes. But again, waiting until you are truly hungry before you actually eat. So you're ratcheting that time back. So with this start time, your break fast time moves later and later in the day as you can comfortably push it, but it doesn't fall back. So you're just keep pushing it a little further or staying where you're at. Then again, your window would close at the same time every day at whatever time you chose it to close in terms of I'm done eating now I'm going to start fasting. Then we have the progressive start. And this is where your break fast is gradually pushed later by the same amount of time every day or every few days until the desired window opening time. So example would be you push your break fast time back by 30 minutes each day until you're breaking your fast at, let's say you wanted to break it at noon, until you finally break it and open the window at noon. So that's more of the progressive start. And we know when you're trying to get the hang of this, that slipping is a natural part of adjusting to that appetite correcting eating schedule, both in maintaining your lifestyle as well as an adjustment to it. But as long as you keep a fasting pattern, a slip or an early break fast for a social occasion is not going to cause you to lose adaptation to fasting. It would take a few days of actually not fasting in order for that to happen. But do be aware that clock hunger can come into play. So where you can feel hungry at the same time the next day, or again, 23 to 24 hours later. If you ignore that clock hunger or tell your body break fast isn't until your usual break fast time, then that hunger usually will pass fairly quickly. Usually find a distraction, finding something to do. But I also like to kind of reference it as kind of like your stomach is throwing a temper tantrum. It's like, but I ate this time yesterday and I want to eat this time now. And people would think that if they fast, that they will just become exponentially more and more and more hungry as the time goes on. And in reality, you become less and less hungry. It becomes easier and easier to not break into that temper tantrum that your stomach is throwing. So eating within your window, as I mentioned, a lifestyle that includes an appetite correcting eating schedule doesn't impose rules about what to eat. Again, you will find as you get closer to your goal, you're going to have to be more cognizant about what you choose to eat. But the nice thing about it is getting you in the realm of it is that nothing is off limits. There's no really true forbidden foods. You are grown up and you know basics of what a healthy diet entails. So you can kind of pick what you like to eat, but you also have to keep in mind, some people might be vegan, they might be vegetarian, they might follow a really low carb diet, which actually does fit really nicely with fasting, but they might have different dietary restrictions that they follow, and that can absolutely be continued because again, it's not what you eat when you're intermittent fasting or working on an appetite correcting plan, it's more of looking at a when. And so when you reach your goal, you can integrate more balanced content. And then we talk about when to eat. So again, it's the opportunity to eat, but it's not an obligation to eat. So you do not have to open up your window and go, okay, I'm going to eat for 5 hours and then just nonstop eat for 5 hours. But you're opening your window and now you have that opportunity to eat. And so some people might choose to open up with a snack and then maybe have a heavier meal later. Some might choose to have a smaller meal and then a kind of a medium-sized meal. Some might choose to eat little bits and graze throughout their 5-hour window. So everybody's a little different depending on what they like. But the biggest goal is that you are eating within a set time frame so that you are fasting the majority of the time. And in that eating window is the time in which your insulin levels are high. And when you're fasting is when they're low. And when your insulin levels are low is when they tap into your fat stores. And that's when you will start breaking down the fat you have on board. So again, you kind of have to find that pattern that works for you, works best for your family. For me, I prefer an evening eating window. And because I'm so busy during the day at work, I don't want to have to think about it. I just want to be able to work. And then when I come home, I can have my nice dinner, and then I can close my window and then repeat the next day. So on the weekends, I might have more of a snack and then have dinner a little later, but I try to keep it within that 5-hour or less eating window. So timing and expectations. So startup. So the time it takes to get on the schedule. It could be, again, one day with the cold turkey method, or as much as a month for a very gradual progressive start. So you kind of have to do what works for you. And when I started, it was more of a progressive start. I kind of inched away an hour each time to add less in my eating window and more in my fasting window as the days went on. And then a 3-week period for adaptation starts the first day you eat within your appetite correcting schedule's window. And then that compensatory overeating fades away and your appetite begins to reset. So again, if you start this process, you're going through this 3-week adjustment period, don't expect to lose weight in this 3-week period. This is where your body is getting used to fasting. It's getting that fasting muscle built up, and you're becoming fat adapted. And then we have active loss. So this is the duration of the phase, depending on how much fat you might have to lose. It could take a week for every pound of fat you want to lose. As you approach your body goal, your appetite will automatically adjust or increase your food intake. So then you get more towards that maintenance phase. And then your body becomes more on autopilot. So again, depending on how much you have to lose will depend on how quickly it works. For most people that might have 25 to 30 pounds to lose, it right away can work really fast. And then as you get closer to your goal, it slows down. And then you have to be more aware of what you're eating and maybe focusing more on whole foods, making sure you're getting your exercise in, you're drinking your water, maybe limiting your alcohol intake, that type of thing to try to get to your goal. But usually the journey getting there, you have a little bit more freedom in terms of what you're eating. And then I'm talking about maintenance. So you're maintaining your goal body after you've lost all the fat that you wanted to lose, and you can keep that same appetite correcting eating schedule or open up your window a little wider. So if you can kind of play with that a little bit to see, hey, if I extend it to 6-hour eating window, do I gain weight or do I still maintain? And so everybody's a little individual when it comes to that, but that's some area in time in which you can play with that. So again, if you start gaining weight, you've opened your window a little too far, go back to what worked best for you to try to get back to your goals. So here's some reasonable expectations. Don't quit after only a few days. Again, you're not going to see any weight loss. Maybe even have gained a little as your body's trying to adjust and regulate, and you might retain more water before you get to that phase. And again, not in that 3 weeks of steady adherence to that an appetite correcting schedule, you shouldn't expect to see any loss, but slow and steady, trust the process and keep going at it. In some individuals, they could see some rapid weight loss of up to several pounds during the first week or two when they're adapting the schedule. Again, and keeping in mind, this is usually water weight, so it's not true fat loss weight. So here are some commonly reported side effects by people that are adopting an appetite correcting eating schedule. You could feel cool or cold during fasting, maybe feeling hot after eating, but some good things being you're happier, you have more resilient mood, you definitely have more energy, you have more mental clarity, more interested in making healthier food choices. If you get sick, you recover quicker, you're sick less often as compared to others. So it's kind of a nice side effects that come as a benefit of appetite correction and intermittent fasting. Some also report reduced symptoms of their inflammation, whether it be joint pain, MS symptoms, irritable bowel symptoms, eczema, asthma, allergies. Sometimes can have changes in sleep, usually normalizing after a couple weeks. Some will report insomnia. You have so much energy, your mind is just going, you have trouble settling down, but after a while that will level off. Or just in general feeling sleepiness or tired. They'd have very vivid or colorful dreams. You might find that you're getting up more often to use the bathroom, and that's especially true during that adaptation period. But then another benefit is like you're decluttering other aspects of your life in your home. You really start thinking like, hey, maybe I need to downsize, or I need to declutter. I don't need all these clothes, or I don't need all this stuff. And it just helps to simplify your life. And so that's the one really another welcoming side effect of an appetite correcting eating schedule. So occasionally we'll have people report they have less heartburn, which is great, or maybe they'll have more heartburn, which is not so great. That they might have less frequent bowel movements, usually in the first 1 to 2 weeks until that gets regulated. Maybe fewer headaches. Some people try to use this type of eating pattern even just to treat migraine headaches, and it can be successful with that. They might find if they have very heavy periods that they're now have lighter ones, or maybe going to be a little off during that period, maybe a longer cycle in between, and maybe having reduced pain and discomfort or cramping during that menstrual cycles. And then that brings me to tool 3, addressing the stress. So, think about taking a stress inventory. Maybe be aware of all the stresses that you and your body are coping with, and try to address some of those stresses. So some might be you're really not getting to sleep on time, or you're staying up really late. So try to adjust that and fix that. See what you can do about that. Manage that stress. If you can get rid of some stressors in your life, or find other techniques like meditation, exercise, deep breathing, yoga, dedicated journaling, reading a book, etc., doing some of these things to help you address your stress, you will be better off. Because if you have high stress, you have high cortisol levels. High cortisol levels make you hold on to more fat and prevent you from losing weight. And so that's all a good reason to get into, avoiding stress and get into managing your stress. Tool number 4 is activity. So be an emotional person. So moving, taking the stairs, parking a car further away, but just finding ways that you can be more active on a day-to-day basis, and just maybe even just you're waiting in line for something, maybe doing some shoulder shrugs, or maybe doing a little bit of calf raises, whatever it may be, but trying to be motion. We know, as I mentioned, exercise is essential to good health, but it doesn't always help for the weight loss aspect and is the best form to compensate for overeating. And then tool number 5, be the wild Mustang. So we've had a lot of time to adapt to our modern way of life with low physical demands, effortless food availability. We know lots of energy dense foods. And so we need to try to avoid those boxes or bags and a lot of the highly processed foods, and try to more stick with foods that are in their most natural state, or more whole foods. They look like the original item. Definitely, when it comes to like frozen vegetables, that's fine. Those types of things are given, but a lot of times a lot of processed foods come in boxes and bags, and that's going to have higher in sodium, and it's going to make things harder for you. But focus again on whole fruits, vegetables, dried beans, lean meats, low-fat dairy, those type of things. And then slower eating and adaptation can help correct appetite as well. So you're being more mindful of what you're putting into your body, and you're taking your time and enjoying your meal. And that can all help with those signals going to your brain to tell your gut, hey, I've had enough, stop, I'm done eating. And then tool number 6 is meal composition. So we really want to encourage people, especially when you're trying to adapt to an appetite correcting lifestyle, is avoiding diet sodas, juice, and especially eating the whole fruit instead. And although stevia is a natural sweetener, and which would be the one I would recommend if you are choosing to use a sweetener, being more of the natural one, avoiding those artificial ones, because even stevia, for example, and any of those artificial sweeteners, and like diet sodas, for example, it's the sweetness that you taste on your tongue that elicits an insulin response. And when insulin levels are high, we don't tap into our fat stores. So you want to give your body a break. And by not having diet sodas or things that have artificial sweeteners in your fasting period, then you're better apt to stay in that fat burning zone. So black coffee is fine, black tea is fine, water is fine, carbonated plain water is fine. But when we get into anything that might have a sweetness or a flavor to it, again, it's that sweetness that you taste on your tongue that sends the message to the brain. Also, some other things, choosing savory over sweet, maybe sticking to more broth-based soups, limiting your salt or your cream-based intake. Try to really focus on vegetables, salads being the centerpiece, and meat being more of a garnish, or grain being more of a garnish. So thinking about it in terms of that can be helpful. And then finding your healthy tribe. So building connection with people and communities that are not food-centered are preferably focused on activities. So if there's some activity that you like to do, crafting or exercise or whatever it may be, trying to find that with like-minded people that enjoy doing those things as well. Could be just a friend, one person who has similar goals and interests as you. It can be a group of people, but we know that lean people are culturally and habitually lean. So they eat, they don't focus on eating as a goal. They'll often prioritize activities ahead of eating. And so those are good groups of people to get yourself connected with. And then building a healthy tribe voluntarily creates positive peer pressure. So trying to find those people with like-minded goals in mind. And then portioning. So start with a smaller plate or a portion. So that's a really easy thing to do, is just not use these gigantic dinner plates that we see these days, but kind of like maybe your step up from your salad plate or around there as your plate. And think about it divided in quarters, 1/4 being your grain or your carbohydrate, 1/4 being your meat, and the other half being your fruits and vegetables, or more heavily your non-starchy vegetables. So thinking about that can be very beneficial. You'll eat less, you'll be more in tuned into what you're eating. If you're super hungry, you can definitely go back and get a second helping, but at least when you're initially starting, it's not like Thanksgiving plate where you have tons of food on there and you feel obligatory to eat it all. You could use a kitchen scale if you're wanting to try to find out how much food you're eating or what it says in the package of what you should be eating. Some people do a bite count, being just aware. Usually most enjoyment comes out of the first few bites anyway. But just taking that time to savor rather than shoveling it in and then feeling just stuffed that you can't possibly take another bite is what we don't want. And then tool number 9 is meal dynamics. So your pecking order. Dessert first so you can savor it rather than squeezing it in when you're already feeling full. My grandfather always used to have that saying, eat your dessert first because you might not have room for it later. And so within reason, but thinking about, hey, you still need to have room for these healthy foods, but it's kind of taking a different pecking order. And you know what? I really, really want to enjoy this dessert. I'm just going to have a small piece of it. So I'm going to enjoy it first. I'm going to have a couple bites of it instead of being so stuffed afterwards that I eat it anyway and then I feel miserable. So then again, pace and duration. Is the meal more like a tweet or an essay? Is it more reminiscent of frenzied choreography, or is it more like a slow dance? So trying to take your time to consume your meal, hopefully enjoying it with others that you enjoy spending time with. And then the timing on that. So when do you eat? The beginning of the eating window, the end? Do you graze throughout your window? Are you doing more snack size portions? So that's finding kind of what works for you and what does that meal dynamic mean to you. So in conclusion, I hope I've equipped you with a set of tools you can use from that you can now be ready to kind of start along this journey. We know that appetite correction fits really nicely and is kind of that whole premise of intermittent fasting. And so your body can do amazing things if you just trust the process. And if you trust in appetite correction, you don't have to hold yourself back. You will be more mindful and you'll want to make healthier choices, but it doesn't mean that foods are off limits or foods are bad or that type of thing. And if after 3 weeks of following an appetite correcting eating plan, you're not noticing a decrease in your appetite, then try a different tool, or maybe be a little bit more stringent on the ones that you did choose to use. Maybe your eating window isn't as tight. Maybe you're not fasting as long as you could. So again, along with your appetite, look for some other signs that are changing, as well as, we talked about, maybe you can move a notch up on your belt buckle, or you have more energy going up the stairs, or whatever it may be. Running around with your kids, you have more energy. So keep working with that appetite correcting toolkit. You can tweak it as your lifestyle changes, and it can fit into your lifestyle, not your lifestyle fitting into it. Anybody have any questions? Any fasting apps? There's a couple of them out there. I tend to use the Lose It app. That one doesn't have specifically a fasting window, but you can change some of the titles, whether it be a fasting period or a not fasting period. But I'm looking at my phone real quick because I know there was a couple of them that I had kind of explored a little bit. Body Fast is one that I've used. And that one is probably, that one and Lose are the two that I have used. And there's other ones out there, but some of them will tell you you'll track more of your eating window, and others will track more of your fasting window. So it depends on kind of what goal you want. I'm more of the one where I like write down the start and the stop time kind of a thing. But most often it tends to fall within that 4 to 5 hour eating window. Herbal teas usually don't fit in the clean fasting category because they're usually flavored. But if it's a non-flavored tea, they can be acceptable. Some will go back and forth with herbal teas, or even like a Earl Grey or different ones like that. So I try to just be as clean as possible and just make sure it's just a black tea, and save more of the herbal teas when I'm in my meal. So maybe I'm going to eat my meal and then I'm going to have a flavored tea when I'm done, kind of a thing before I close my window. Okay, let's see. How much water should I drink during the day? Well, it's pretty individual, but we usually say 8-ounce glasses. Or if you took your weight in kilograms and multiplied it by 30 milliliters, it would give you kind of a how many milliliters in a day. But if you usually focus on 8-ounce glasses, or just listen to your body. I mean, a lot of times, if you're really thirsty, you're already mildly dehydrated, but just staying hydrated in general can be helpful. So maybe starting out the day with a glass of water, ending your day with a glass of water, and at each of your meals, ensure that you're having fluids. And we know that vegetables and fruits that have water content can count towards your water intake as well. Or if you eat soup or anything like that, that's all going to add. Chewing gum during fasting, yes, off limits. Yep, because what happens is a lot of times they're sugar-free, and so they give you a little bit of the actual non-nutritive sweetener will create the sweetness on your tongue, and so your insulin can get released from that. So I found with people that usually chew gum is it makes it harder for them. They tend to like white knuckle it and find it really hard to stay on the eating plan or to try to keep fasting as long as they want to. And so that's one reason why I would say, yeah, maybe chewing gum is something you might not want to do. Typically, it's something that is not in a clean fast. I've not used the Fastic app, but that's a good one somebody recommended, so you might want to try that. Some people have said they've used that, so that's good. Let's see, what other questions here? Black coffee is okay during fasting, right? I know that there's been a little bit of mixed philosophy. You'll hear people talk about with black coffee in particular, like adding butter to it or different things like that, kind of like a loaded coffee. In the research that I have done, it's really heavily based on just black coffee. Black coffee tea having more of a bitter profile, so you're not going to interrupt your fast by consuming black coffee, for example. So if you're going to add creamer, have it within your eating window. Yes, the book does go into more detail about timing of fasting and eating windows. Another great book that goes along with that as well would be Feast, Fast, Repeat by Jen Stevens. That's a really great book. She kind of breaks it down in terms of very easy to understand, kind of like a comprehensive fasting book. Most of the research, you can get the science book by Dr. Jason Fung. So he does a lot with his group in Canada. He's a nephrologist who has a diabetes clinic, and they focus on getting long-term individuals off their insulin, where they're not taking insulin any longer or considered now no longer diabetic. And so his books are great. He's got the diabetes code, the obesity code. He's got a co-book that he did, which is, I think it's Eating in the Fasting Lane, something along those lines. So that's another great book too. So there's a lot of great resources out there in addition to the research articles that are out there in regards to fasting. Does caffeine play a role in appetite correction? Well, in some cases, some people, it can stunt their appetite a little bit, so it can be helpful to have coffee or have tea. Certainly can do decaf if you'd like. You don't have to do caffeinated. In terms, there hasn't been a lot of information, I would say, on that, caffeine playing that role. But yes, in terms of it being useful in coffee and tea, yes. So I guess I would say you can certainly use that for helpful in getting you through the fasting period. I would say no to flavored coffee, again, because it's flavored, it's got a sweetness to it that can kick you out of your fast. How do you intermittent fast if your blood sugar goes low? So if you are one that suffers from hypoglycemia, definitely if you are diabetic, you would want to make sure that you're working with somebody when you're doing this. We have had some physicians that have had patients that have come and said, yep, my doctor told me I'm diabetic and I'm supposed to be intermittent fasting, and they want me to eat between this window and that window. But if you're somebody that does have low blood sugars and you have tested it and you know you have a low blood sugar, then definitely you're going to need to open your window sooner. But for others that don't have diabetes, if you experience that feeling like you're having a lower blood sugar, but you don't have diabetes, that in time, as you keep doing it, especially within the first week or so, it gets easier and easier, and it's not a true hypoglycemia. And again, it's more tied into that hunger factor. And so if you are diabetic, use caution with that. Make sure you're following with somebody that can monitor your blood sugars with that. But if you're not, it's usually something that can be easily conquered. I am retired and I have breakfast dates and lunch dates throughout the month, not changing my tribes. Can I change my window these days? Absolutely. Or even, changing your window to be more of a morning lunch window, because for some that is their tribe time. And so that's a great concept. And that's what we like about intermittent fasting, is that it does not have to be the same that I would do, the same that you would do. You find what works in your lifestyle. As I mentioned, I'm more of an eating window in the evening, whereas some other people enjoy the morning hours, and that's more of their time. And so you can kind of play with what works for you. And sometimes by shaking it up a little bit from one day to the next, and throwing in those occasional days that are a little different, can help prevent adaptation to your body, so your body doesn't get used to your metabolism to that same meal, same time that you eat every day. And so that could be a good thing. I need to have dinner with my hubby too. So is this coming from the same person? So yeah, you can change it off, and just maybe sometimes you'll eat dinner a little earlier. Maybe you'll close your window a little earlier on those days if you have an earlier opening window. So it's, again, flexibility, which is wonderful. And Dr. Jason Bung talks a lot about that too, is that it has that flexibility to work for you. So is this basically fasting program to lose weight? Well, that's the basis of where it started, was appetite correcting. It's being more mindful of what you're eating and being able to pay attention to those breaks in your day of when you're eating. So it was kind of like that 5 fast rule. So it was maybe fasting for 5 days, not consecutively, but doing the fasting routine and then going off of it, or doing like a 5-4. So you would maybe, so like maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you would fast and maybe just eat your dinner meals. And then the other days, offsetting days, you'd have your normal eating pattern, whether you ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that type of thing. So it can be tweaked in any way. But the biggest thing is realizing that our bodies need a break. And so whether that for you is going to be a 15-hour break, including your sleep of not eating, or an 18-hour break, or whatever it may be. But most Americans have some sugary beverage that they are sipping on daily, all day long. And when you're doing that, you are constantly spiking your insulin levels. So you're never giving your body a chance to tap into those fat stores. So that is one good place to start, is to cut out the snacks, not snacking in between meals. You know, if you're one that wants to start out very easily, just start by maybe just not eating breakfast and you continue to eat your lunch and dinner, or eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, condense it down to an 8-hour window, but then not eating snacks in between. So again, lots of flexibility in how you can do that. Someone asked, please repeat the name of the other fasting book. Okay, so where there was Fast, Feast, Repeat. And the other one, let me look that up real quick for you. And it is by Dr. Jason Fung, and then he wrote it with 2 other people as well. And these are 2 individuals that run. It's called Life in the Fasting Lane, How to Make Intermittent Fasting a Lifestyle. And that one is by Megan Ramos, Eve Mayer, and Jason Fung. So if you're looking for that one. But other ones would be, as I mentioned, the Obesity Code, Diabetes Code, if you're interested in those, by Dr. Jason Fung as well. And what about wine? So again, wine can be consumed, but consume it in your window. As I mentioned, sometimes people that are getting closer to their weight goals, they need to kind of watch that a little bit more and cut back on their alcohol intake. So in the beginning phases, it might not make a difference, but as they're getting closer and closer, it might be a place they need to tweak. Next question says, should windows close by a certain time? And again, that's individual. That depends on what works for you. As I mentioned, mine's a nighttime window. Some people like different windows, but usually looking at a 5-hour window has got the most benefit. So if you're eating in a 5-hour window and at least fasting in a 19-hour window, or if you're doing an 18-hour fast and eating in a 6-hour window, that's another good place. So again, it depends on where you want to adjust your schedule to, and all individual based on what is good for you.